The Galactic Concord had existed for 12,000 years. It was a peaceful union of species who had long ago forgotten what it meant to be afraid. The member races were gentle creatures. They were herbivores and scavengers who had evolved on safe worlds where predators were rare or absent entirely. They built their civilization on cooperation and trade. They shared knowledge freely. They had no armies because they had no enemies. The few predator species that once roamed the stars had been driven to extinction thousands of years ago. The galaxy was safe, and the Concord intended to keep it that way. When their deep space probes detected strange radio signals coming from an unremarkable solar system on the edge of explored space, the Concord saw it as a wonderful opportunity. A new species meant new friends, new ideas, and new members for their great union. They dispatched their finest ambassador vessel to make first contact with this exciting discovery. Ambassador of the was chosen to lead the delegation. He was tall and slender with 4 arms and large oval eyes that could detect the smallest movement from great distances. His species had evolved as prey animals on a dangerous world, and their survival had depended on spotting threats before those threats spotted them. But that was ancient history. They had been safe for so long that had never known fear in his entire life. He was excited to meet the new species and welcome them into the galactic family. The ambassador vessel entered orbit around the blue planet called Earth. The humans responded quickly to their signals and invited them to visit a structure they called a space station, prepared his delegation, and traveled across to meet their hosts for the first time. Commander Jake was waiting for them when they arrived. He was a human male of average height with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. He smiled warmly and extended his hand in greeting. Beside him stood Dr. Lisa Carver, a scientist who studied alien life, and Captain Danny, who was responsible for security on the station. The 3 humans seemed genuinely happy to see them. Studied the humans with polite curiosity as they walked through the station corridors. They moved differently from any species he had encountered before. Their steps were smooth and purposeful. There was no wasted motion in anything they did. Their eyes never stopped moving, constantly scanning their surroundings even while they spoke. Found this mildly unsettling but dismissed the feeling as simple unfamiliarity. The humans had prepared a formal dinner to welcome their guests. The dining hall was decorated with colorful banners and soft music played in the background. The alien delegates took their seats and waited to see what human hospitality looked like. When the food arrived, felt the first stirring of something cold in his stomach. The humans were eating meat. Cooked flesh sat on their plates and they consumed it with obvious enjoyment. Jake noticed the ambassador staring and offered an apologetic smile. "I hope this does not offend you," Jake said. "We should have asked about your dietary preferences. Humans eat both plants and animals. We are what our scientists call omnivores." Forced himself to remain calm. Many species consumed organic matter in various forms. This was not necessarily alarming. "That is quite all right," he replied. "I am simply curious. Does your species hunt for this meat?" Dr. Lisa Carver leaned forward with the enthusiasm of a scientist discussing her favorite subject. "Historically, yes. Humans were hunters for most of our evolution. We practiced something called persistence hunting. Our ancestors would chase prey animals across vast distances, sometimes for entire days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Humans cannot run as fast as many animals, but we can run longer than almost anything else alive." The translator rendered her words with perfect clarity. A heavy silence fell over the alien delegation. Several of the diplomats had stopped eating. One of them, a small furry creature from a species called the, was trembling slightly. Maintained his composure with great effort. "That is fascinating," he said. "Your species must be very resilient." The dinner continued, but the mood had changed. The aliens asked careful questions, and the humans answered honestly, unaware of the growing tension. They learned that humans had forward-facing eyes positioned for depth perception and tracking movement. They learned that human teeth included sharp canines designed for tearing flesh. They learned that the human cardiovascular system was among the most efficient ever recorded, capable of sustaining physical activity for hours without rest. Every answer painted the same picture. Every detail pointed to the same terrible conclusion. That night, returned to the ambassador vessel and locked himself in his private quarters. He accessed the biological data that the humans had freely shared during their initial communications. He studied their anatomy, their evolutionary history, their physiological capabilities. His 4 hands trembled as he scrolled through the information. The humans had binocular vision, evolved for tracking prey. They had sweat glands that allowed them to regulate their body temperature during extended pursuits. They had dense bones and powerful muscles designed for combat. Their brains had developed advanced pattern recognition, specifically for predicting the movement of other creatures. Everything about their bodies screamed the same message. Apex predator. Had studied the extinct predator species that once terrorized the galaxy. He had seen their skeletal remains in museums and read about them in historical archives. The humans matched every profile. They were hunters, they were killers, and they had no idea that their new friends were terrified of them. The ambassador recorded an encrypted message for the conquered High Council. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "The new species calls themselves humans," he said. "They appear friendly and civilized. They have welcomed us warmly and shown us nothing but kindness. But I must report a deeply concerning discovery. The humans are predators. They evolved as hunters and their bodies are built for pursuit and killing. They have invited us to visit their world. They want to join our conquered." He paused and took a shaky breath. "The humans do not know that we are afraid. They do not realize what they are. I believe they genuinely wish to be our friends, but I do not know if the conquered can accept predators into our union. I do not know if we can trust creatures whose ancestors spent millions of years perfecting the art of the hunt. I await your guidance on how to proceed." Ended the recording and sent it across the stars. Then he sat alone in the darkness of his quarters and wondered what the future would hold. The humans had smiled at him with their sharp teeth and their predator eyes. They had seemed so warm and welcoming. But prey animals never forgot what those smiles really meant. The message from Ambassador spread through the galactic conquered like fire through dry grass. Within days, every member species had received the warning. Within weeks, the entire galaxy knew the terrible truth about the new species from the small blue world. The humans were predators. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Species that had lived in peace for thousands of years suddenly remembered ancient fears buried deep in their genetic memory. They recalled distant ancestors who had fled from hungry predators across endless plains. They dreamed of shadows with sharp teeth lurking outside their burrows. The great amphibian found themselves checking dark corners and jumping at sudden sounds. Fear had returned to the galaxy, and it wore a human face. Diplomatic channels that had been eager and open suddenly grew cold. Trade delegations that had planned visits to Earth found urgent reasons to delay or cancel. Scientific exchanges were postponed indefinitely. The humans noticed the change but did not understand it. They assumed there were bureaucratic complications or cultural misunderstandings. They had no idea that half the galaxy was afraid to be in the same room with them. On Earth, humanity celebrated their new place among the stars. They had spent centuries looking up at the night sky and wondering if they were alone. Now they knew the answer and they were overjoyed. The governments of Earth united in their desire to join the galactic community. They appointed their finest diplomat to represent them. Ambassador had served humanity for 30 years. She was a woman of 50 with silver hair and kind brown eyes that had seen both the best and worst of human nature. She believed deeply in cooperation and understanding. She had devoted her life to building bridges between different peoples. Now, she would build a bridge between humanity and the stars. Her aide was a young officer named Park. He was bright and enthusiastic and eager to make history. Together, They boarded a human vessel and traveled to the conquered capital on a world called Prime. The capital was beautiful beyond anything had imagined. Towers of crystal reached toward purple skies. Gardens floated on anti-gravity platforms high above the streets. Creatures of 100 different species walked together in apparent harmony. Felt tears forming in her eyes as she witnessed the achievement of galactic civilization. The conquered council chamber was vast enough to hold representatives from every member species. Hundreds of aliens filled the tiered seating that surrounded a central speaking platform. Walked toward that platform with at her side. She noticed that the delegates seemed nervous. Many of them leaned away from her as she passed. Some breathed rapidly and clutched the edges of their seats. A few actually trembled. Assumed this was simply the natural anxiety of meeting a new and unknown species. She smiled warmly to reassure them. Several delegates in the front rows flinched visibly. One small creature covered its eyes with its paws. She reached the platform and began her speech. She spoke of hope and friendship and mutual benefit. She described humanity's dream of reaching the stars and finding kindred spirits among the cosmos. She talked about the wonderful things humans and aliens could achieve together. She promised that Earth would be a faithful and generous partner in the great work of galactic civilization. When she finished speaking, she smiled again at the assembly. She showed her teeth in the human expression of happiness and goodwill. 17 delegates fled the chamber in obvious terror. Others pressed themselves back in their seats as far as they could go. The room filled with the sound of rapid breathing and whispered panic. Stood frozen on the platform. She did not understand what she had done wrong. High Counselor of the approached her after the chamber had emptied. Was ancient even by the standards of her long-lived species. Her skin was the deep blue of ocean water, and her eyes were enormous silver orbs that reflected the light like mirrors. She moved slowly but with great dignity. "Ambassador," she said, "I must ask you a question that may seem strange." Nodded, "Of course, I want to understand. When your species encounters a creature weaker than yourselves, what is your first instinct? What do you feel compelled to do?" Considered the question carefully. To protect it, I suppose, to help it if we can. Its great eyes blinked slowly. Your ancestors were hunters. Your bodies are designed to kill. Every aspect of your biology marks you as a predator species, yet you say your instinct is to protect the weak. Understanding began to dawn on. Is that why everyone is afraid? Because we evolved as hunters. The conquered has not known predators for 8,000 years, explained. The species that once hunted us are gone. We have lived in peace for so long that we had almost forgotten what fear felt like. And then you arrived. You smile and show your teeth. Your eyes track every movement in the room. You move like creatures who are used to chasing prey. Our bodies remember what our minds have forgotten. We are afraid of you, Ambassador. We cannot help it. Felt a deep sadness settle over her. "We are not your enemies," she said softly. "Yes, our ancestors hunted, but we spent thousands of years learning to control those instincts. We developed ethics and laws and compassion. We protect species from extinction on our own world. We raise animals and care for them. We have rules about warfare and treatment of prisoners. Our greatest heroes are those who defend the helpless against those who would harm them." Recorded every word on a small device. "This requires further study," she said. "You are something we have never encountered before, a predator that chooses not to prey. I do not know what to make of you." Far away from Prime, in the dark spaces between stars where no civilization had ventured for, something ancient stirred. They had been patient. They had waited in the cold void for 8,000 years, nursing their hatred and planning their return. They had watched the conquered grow soft and weak. They had bided their time. Now they watched the new arrivals with great interest. These humans were predators like themselves. They recognized the signs immediately. They saw kindred spirits in those forward-facing eyes and those bodies built for pursuit. Or perhaps they saw rivals. They had ruled through terror once before. They would do so again. But first they needed to understand these newcomers. First they needed to know if humans would be allies or obstacles in the great hunt to come. In the shadows between galaxies, ancient ships began to wake from their long slumber. Engines that had been cold for burned hot once more. They were coming home. And the galaxy that had forgotten fear was about to remember. The colony world of IV was home to 3 million. They had built a peaceful civilization there over 5 centuries. Their cities were graceful structures of flowing architecture that blended with the natural landscape. Their children played in open parks without fear. Their elders taught the young ones about the wonders of the galaxy and the friendship of the conquered. One morning, a shadow fell across the sky that would not lift. They came without warning. Their ships descended through the atmosphere like black rain. They were organic vessels grown from living tissue, pulsing with terrible life. The colonists had never seen anything like them. They had no weapons to fight back. They had no soldiers to protect them. They had only their terror and their desperate pleas for help. The messages that reached the conquered were fragmented and filled with screaming. They described nightmares made real. There were 6-limbed horrors covered in black armor that seemed to grow from their bodies like shells. They had claws that could tear through metal and teeth designed for one purpose only. They moved with the speed of striking serpents, and they showed no mercy whatsoever. By the time conquered vessels arrived at IV, there was nothing left to save. 3 million people had been reduced to bones and ash. The cities were burning ruins. The parks where children had played were silent graves. They had taken everything and left nothing behind but the stench of death. High Counselor received the report in her chambers on Prime. Her ancient hands shook as she read the details. She had studied thee in historical archives. She knew what they had done to the galaxy before their supposed extinction. Now they had returned, and the conquered was utterly unprepared to face them. More attacks followed in rapid succession. Colony after colony fell silent. The fleet moved through conquered space like a blade through soft flesh. They targeted the weakest populations first. They hunted for sport as much as for sustenance. They broadcast recordings of their conquests to spread fear ahead of their advance. The conquered tried to respond, but their efforts were pathetic. Their ships were designed for patrol and transport, not combat. Their crews had never trained for battle. When they engaged, they were slaughtered within minutes. The defensive fleet that protected Prime was considered the finest in the galaxy. It would not survive a single hour against the enemy. Gathered the council for an emergency session. The chamber that had once been filled with calm discussion now echoed with panic and despair. Representatives shouted over each other. Some demanded immediate evacuation of all core worlds. Others suggested surrender and hoped they might show mercy. None of them had any real solutions. "There is one option we have not considered," said when the noise finally died down. The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned to the ancient counselor. "The humans," she continued. "They are predators. They evolved as hunters just as the did. Perhaps they can fight where we cannot." The reaction was immediate and hostile. Delegates shouted that inviting one predator species to fight another was madness. They argued that the humans might simply join them instead. They insisted that predators could never be trusted. Let them exhaust themselves before speaking again. I have studied the humans since their ambassador visited us. They are unlike any predator in our records. They developed codes of honor. They protect weaker creatures. They have instincts for violence, but they choose restraint. I believe they will help us if we ask." "And if you are wrong?" demanded a delegate who had lost millions to the advance. "Then we die slightly sooner than we would have otherwise," replied. "They will reach Prime within 3 months at their current pace. Our defenses will not stop them. We have no other choices remaining." The vote was narrow, but the motion passed. A desperate plea for help was broadcast toward Earth. Commander Ben Taylor received the message aboard the carrier Endeavour. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and steady hands that had seen combat in 3 different wars. His crew was among the finest in the United Earth Navy. They had trained for years in simulations against every imaginable enemy. None of those simulations had prepared them for what they saw on their screens. The message from the conquered was filled with horror. Images of destroyed worlds and slaughtered civilians played in endless loops. The aliens who had been too afraid to shake hands with humans were now begging those same humans to save them from something worse. Ben assembled his command staff in the briefing room. Lieutenant Commander Amy was his tactical officer. She had a gift for seeing patterns in chaos and finding weakness in enemy formations. Chief Petty Officer Nick Santos led the Marine contingent. He was built like a bear and fought like a demon, but his heart was surprisingly gentle. Doctor served as medical officer and xenobiology expert. She could save lives as easily as she could analyze them. They studied the data on the with professional interest. Where the conquered species saw only terror, the humans saw an enemy to be understood and defeated. Big and fast, Nick observed, examining the physical specifications. Heavy natural armor, claws that can cut through steel, but look at their respiratory system. They are built for quick bursts of activity, not sustained effort. Sprinters, not marathon runners. Amy pulled up tactical projections of fleet movements. Their coordination is pack-based, small groups hunting independently with loose central command, effective against prey that runs and hides, less effective against organized resistance. Doctor highlighted the biological data. They process fear responses. They actually feed on the terror of their victims in some psychological sense. An enemy that does not fear them would be genuinely confusing to their hunting instincts. Ben stood before the main display and studied the patterns of destruction. His gray eyes traced the path they had taken through conquered space. He saw the logic of their advance. He understood their strategy. "They are predators," he said quietly. "But so are we, and we have spent 10,000 years practicing war against each other. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategy we have developed comes from fighting enemies who were just as dangerous as ourselves." He turned to face his officers. The conquered never learned how to fight because they never needed to. They never faced real opposition because their prey always ran. Neither of them knows what happens when a predator meets another predator. Ben activated the ship-wide communication system. His voice carried to every corner of the Endeavor. "All hands, this is the commander. We have received a distress call from the Galactic Conquered. An enemy fleet is destroying their worlds and killing their people. They have asked for our help. We are going to give it to them. Set course for the front lines. We hunt tonight." The Endeavor turned toward the stars and began its journey into war. The fleet arrived at Prime expecting easy prey. They had conquered 17 worlds in the past 2 months without losing a single ship. The conquered defenders had crumbled before them like dry leaves in a storm. The capital world would fall just as easily, and then the heart of galactic civilization would belong to them once more. They did not expect to find the human vessels waiting for them. Commander Ben Taylor had positioned his fleet in the debris field of a shattered moon near the edge of the system. The human ships powered down their active systems and drifted among the rocks like sleeping predators. They made no transmissions. They showed no lights. They were invisible to sensors that searched for engine signatures and electromagnetic emissions. The fleet swept past them without a second glance. Their hunters were searching for the panicked flight of prey. They expected ships desperately trying to escape. They expected targets that would scatter and run. They found only darkness and silence. When they had fully committed to their approach toward Prime, the human ships came alive. Engines flared to life in perfect synchronization. Weapons systems locked onto targets. The ambush was sprung with surgical precision. The first volley destroyed 12 vessels before they could even turn to face the threat. Human gunners targeted engine systems and weapons arrays with accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. The predators who had never known fear suddenly found themselves wounded and confused. The turn to engage their attackers, but the human fleet was already moving. They did not stay to fight a direct battle. They hit hard and then fell back into the debris field, drawing the enemy after them. What followed was not a battle but a hunt that stretched across 3-star systems. The humans understood something about combat that they had never learned. Aggression was not enough. Speed was not enough. To truly defeat a powerful enemy, you needed patience. You needed endurance. You needed to make every engagement count while preserving your own strength. They were built for quick and brutal hunts. They could sprint faster than almost any creature in the galaxy, but they could not maintain that pace for long. Their respiratory systems burned through energy quickly. Their organic ships needed time to regenerate after taking damage. The longer the battle continued, the weaker they became. The humans never stopped moving. They struck and retreated. They appeared from unexpected angles and vanished before the enemy could respond. They forced them to chase them across vast distances, burning fuel and exhausting their crews. Days became weeks. The hunters began to realize they were becoming the hunted. On the surface of Prime, the situation was equally desperate. Landing parties had made it through the orbital defenses before the human fleet arrived. They stalked through the streets of the capital city, hunting civilians who cowered in their homes. The local defenders had tried to stop them, but their weapons were useless against armor. Their soldiers were paralyzed by fear. Sergeant Laura and her Marine squad dropped into the city through the shattered roof of a transport terminal. They hit the ground running and immediately took cover. Laura was a small woman with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had grown up hunting deer in the forests of her. She had served in 3 military campaigns against human enemies. She knew how predators thought because she was one herself. "Movement on the left," whispered Private Cole. He was young but steady, a farm boy from the Midwest who had found his calling in the military. 3 of them, big ones. Laura studied them through her scope. They were everything the reports had described. 6 limbs covered in black armor, claws that could tear through steel, teeth designed for ripping flesh. They moved through the rubble with the confidence of creatures who had never been challenged. "They are hunting in a triangle formation," Laura said quietly. "Classic predator pattern. Lead hunter flushes prey while the flankers cut off escape routes." "So what do we do?" asked Corporal. She was the squad's heavy weapons specialist, a tall woman with arms like tree trunks and a grin that appeared whenever things got dangerous. "We break their pattern," Laura replied. "You and Martinez circle around behind them, find high ground with that cannon. When I give the signal, we hit them from 3 directions at once, make them the ones who feel surrounded." The squad moved into position with practiced efficiency. They continued their hunt, unaware that they were walking into a trap. They passed through a narrow alley between collapsed buildings. Laura waited until all 3 were committed to the passage. Now, the ambush was over in seconds. His heavy cannon tore through the lead before it could react, and Martinez opened fire from behind, catching the flankers in a crossfire. The creatures tried to scatter, but there was nowhere to run. They were not accustomed to being on the receiving end of an ambush. One survived long enough to charge toward Laura's position. It was wounded but still deadly, a mass of claws and teeth and fury. Laura did not run. She did not freeze. She stepped to the side at the last moment and put 3 rounds through the gap in its armor where the neck met the shoulder. The creature collapsed at her feet and did not rise again. The battle for Prime continued for 6 long days. Human Marines moved through the city like ghosts, hunting parties that had expected to face only terrified prey. They set ambushes and laid traps. They picked off isolated enemies and faded back into the ruins before reinforcements could arrive. They never stopped, never rested, never gave the enemy a moment of peace. A captured warrior would later describe the experience to conquered interrogators. Its words would be studied for centuries by military historians across the galaxy. We hunted them through the city for 6 hours. We killed 2 of them, but they kept coming. They did not tire. They did not stop. Every time we thought we had escaped, they appeared again. By the end, we realized that we were not the hunters anymore. We had become the prey. In orbit, Commander Ben Taylor sent a message on an open channel. He knew the commanders would hear it. He wanted them to hear it. You made a mistake coming here. We do not hunt for food. We hunt for justice, for protection, for the challenge of facing a worthy enemy. We will follow you across this galaxy. We will not stop. We will not tire. Run if you wish. Our ancestors chased prey for millions of years. We have patience you cannot imagine. The had ruled through terror for as long as their species could remember. They had never known what it meant to be afraid. Now they were learning. The final confrontation came in the home system. It was a place of darkness and death, a dying red star surrounded by the bones of worlds that had been devoured long ago. This was where they had retreated after their empire fell 8,000 years before. This was where they had waited and plotted and bred new generations of hunters. Now it would be where they made their last stand. Admiral Gregg commanded the assembled armada that jumped into the system. His fleet was larger than any force humanity had ever deployed beyond their own solar system. Beside the human warships flew vessels from a dozen conquered species. Crews who had once trembled at the sight of human teeth now fought proudly alongside their new allies. They had seen what the humans could do. They had watched the predators who terrified them stand between the innocent and the monsters who would devour them. Fear had transformed into something unexpected: trust. The fleet formed a defensive sphere around their breeding world. They had lost half their ships in the long retreat across the galaxy. Their crews were exhausted and their resources were depleted, but they were still deadly. They were still predators. They would not surrender what they had built over 8,000 years. Admiral studied the enemy formation on the tactical display. His gray eyes traced the patterns of their deployment. Beside him stood Commander Ben Taylor, who had led the initial engagements and earned the respect of every officer in the fleet. "They are protecting their queen," Ben observed. "Kill her and the species loses its ability to reproduce. They know that. They will fight to the last ship to stop us from reaching her." "Then we give them something else to worry about," replied. He opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All vessels begin attack pattern Sigma. Draw them out. Make them chase you." The human ships surged forward in a complex dance of feints and strikes. They attacked from multiple angles, never committing fully, always pulling back before they could bring their full strength to bear. It was the same strategy that had worked before. They knew it was coming, but they could not stop themselves from responding. Their instincts demanded that they pursue threats. Their nature compelled them to chase. The defensive sphere began to fragment as ships broke formation to hunt the human attackers. Gaps appeared in their protective screen. Colonel Tony Vance, commanding the Marine Assault Force, saw his opportunity. "Drop pods away," he ordered. "All units, we are going in." 100 pods fell toward the like metal rain. Anti-aircraft fire from the surface destroyed some of them. Others were torn apart by debris, but enough made it through. Human Marines hit the ground and immediately began their advance toward the central hive complex where the Queen waited. The fighting on the surface was the most brutal of the entire war. Warriors swarmed from every tunnel and chamber, desperate to protect their mother. They fought with the fury of creatures who knew extinction was coming. They were faster than the humans. They were stronger than the humans. But they could not match human endurance and they could not match human coordination. Tony Vance led his troops through corridors that stank of death and alien biology. His rifle was hot in his hands and his armor was splashed with black blood. Marines fell around him, but the advance never stopped. They pushed forward step by bloody step, clearing each chamber before moving to the next. The Queen's throne room was vast and dark. Bioluminescent growths on the walls provided the only light. The Queen herself was enormous, a bloated creature 3 times the size of her warriors, covered in the same black armor but decorated with patterns that marked her status. She was surrounded by her finest guards, the largest and deadliest remaining. The final battle lasted 47 minutes. It was fought with guns and knives and bare hands when ammunition ran out. When it was over, the guards were dead and the Queen was on her knees before Colonel Vance. His helmet was gone. His face was streaked with sweat and blood and dirt. His eyes were tired, but they did not waver. "What are you?" the Queen asked through a translator device. Her voice was a rasping whisper, nothing like the terrifying roar of her warriors. "You fight like predators, but you do not hunt to feed. You kill, but you do not devour. What manner of creature are you?" Tony looked down at her with something that might have been pity. "We are what you could have become," he said. "Predators who learned mercy. Hunters who chose to protect instead of consume. You spent 8,000 years in the darkness perfecting your ability to kill. We spent the same time learning when not to kill. That is why you lost. That is why you will always lose. Power without restraint destroys itself eventually. You are proof of that." The Queen had no response. Her species had never developed concepts like mercy or restraint. She could not understand what she was hearing. The war ended that day. The breeding capabilities were destroyed. Their fleet was scattered. The survivors were exiled to the void between galaxies, condemned to drift forever in the cold darkness they had called home for so long. Some whispered that they might return someday, in 1,000 years or 10,000, hungry for revenge. The humans smiled when they heard such whispers. "Let them come," they said. "We will be waiting." In the years that followed, humanity took its place in the galactic conquered, not as conquerors but as guardians. The species that had once feared humans came to understand a profound truth. Having a predator as an ally meant never being prey again. Ambassador addressed the conquered assembly 5 years after the war's end. The chamber was full, but there was no fear in the air. Delegates who had once fled at her smile now applauded when she entered. Many had served alongside human soldiers. Many owed their lives to human courage. "We know what we are," said to the assembly. "We carry the instincts of hunters in every cell of our bodies. Our ancestors survived by chasing prey until it collapsed. Our eyes face forward because we evolved to track movement and judge distance for the kill. We cannot change what we are, but we can choose what we do with it." She paused and looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species who now called humanity their friends. Being a predator does not mean you must prey upon the weak. It means you have power and you must decide how to use that power. You can destroy or you can protect. You can take or you can give. Humanity made that choice long ago. We chose to become guardians instead of hunters. We chose to defend instead of devour. And we will keep that promise to you, our friends, for as long as the stars burn. The assembly rose in applause. It was a gesture they had learned from humans, this clapping of hands to show appreciation. It felt strange to species who had never known such customs, but it felt right. Across the galaxy, on 100 worlds, statues were raised to honor the humans who had saved them. The inscriptions varied by language and culture, but the meaning was universal. "Here stand the hunters who guard the herd." The galaxy had learned a new truth. The most dangerous creature in existence was not the one with the sharpest claws or the strongest muscles. It was the one who had the power to destroy everything and chose to protect it instead. Humanity had become what they were always meant to be. The apex guardians of the stars.